All right, let's get those Spanish brains warmed up because we're going deep into the world of adjetivos. And for anyone who's just starting out with Spanish, that's adjectives. You sent over some practice exercises from a Jaime Lara video. So we're going to break those down, see what they can teach us about how these adjectives actually work in Spanish.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so these exercises are all about getting people comfortable with using adjectives, not just memorizing a bunch of words, but actually putting them into practice. So what we're aiming for in this deep dive is to really help you grasp the key ideas behind these exercises. And hey, maybe we'll all learn some useful Spanish along the way.
One thing I find interesting is how this approach really mirrors how we naturally learn language. It's not about memorizing abstract grammar rules. It's about using them in real situations.
Exactly. It's about learning by doing. So let's jump right into exercise 1. This one's a fill-in-the-blank kind of deal where you have to choose the right adjective form to complete the sentence. Seems pretty straightforward, but I have a feeling there's more to it than meets the eye.
You're absolutely right. This exercise is subtly introducing us to one of the fundamental concepts in Spanish grammar. Adjective agreement. Basically means making sure your adjectives match the noun they're describing in both gender and number.
For those of us who need a little refresher, what exactly do gender and number mean when we're talking about Spanish?
Yeah, it's easy to forget the basics sometimes. So in Spanish, nouns have a gender, either masculine or feminine, and a number, either singular or plural. Think of it this way. Masculine nouns are usually things you'd use el for, like el libro, the book. And feminine nouns are usually things you'd use la for, like la casa, the house. And then, of course, singular means one, and plural means more than one. So adjective agreement means making sure the endings of your adjectives match all of that.
So it's not enough to just know the adjective. You have to tweak it depending on the noun.
Precisely. Let's look at one example that Jaime Lara uses. Juan vive en un pueblo muy grande. Juan lives in a very big town. Grande, meaning big, has to agree with pueblo, meaning town, which is masculine and singular.
Okay, I see how the ending changes to match. I noticed that Jaime Lara used grande here to describe the town, not gran, which I always thought also meant big. Is there like a subtle difference between those two?
You've hit on something really important. While both words can mean big, they actually carry slightly different connotations. Grande emphasizes the physical size of something, while gran implies more like grandeur or importance. Think about a famous landmark like El Escorial. We might say un gran edificio, a grand building to highlight its historical and architectural significance. But we wouldn't necessarily say un grande edificio unless we were specifically talking about its massive physical size.
Wow, that's a really fascinating distinction. It's amazing how those little word choices can make a big difference in how you express yourself in Spanish.
Absolutely. And that's why adjective practice is so crucial. It's not just about knowing the words. It's about choosing the right word to convey that precise nuance of meaning you intend.
All right, let's move on to exercise 2. This one is a bit more visual and a bit more creative. We're giving a series of images, a woman, a dog, mountains, a beach, and the challenge is to describe each one using 3 adjectives.
This is where things start to get really interesting. It's not just about knowing the vocabulary. It's about using it thoughtfully to create a vivid picture in your mind.
Yeah, it's like going from vocabulary flashcards to writing poetry. Like, for example, Jaime Lara describes the mountains as soleado, verdes, and tranquilo, sunny, green, and tranquil. But we could just as easily go with altas, rocosas, and imponentes, tall, rocky, and imposing.
Exactly. You can describe the same image in so many different ways. It all depends on what aspects you want to emphasize. And that's the beauty of this exercise. It encourages you to really look at the image, to consider its different qualities, and then choose the words that best capture your own personal interpretation.
It's like he's encouraging us to find our own voice in Spanish. Not just repeating prepackaged descriptions, but using the language to express our own unique perspective.
That's a great way to put it. It's something that often gets lost in traditional language learning.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about developing a personal connection with the language.
And speaking of personal connection, listener, how would you describe those mountains? Just take a moment, picture them in your mind. What 3 adjectives come to mind?
Think about not just what they look like, but the feeling they evoke. Are they majestic, intimidating, serene?
There's no right or wrong answer. It's about using your imagination and finding the words that resonate with you.
And hey, if you're drawing a blank, don't worry. Jaime Lara's video has a ton of great adjective examples to get you started.
Yeah, for sure. But here's the really cool part. Even though we're talking about Spanish, these ideas apply to learning any language.
Absolutely. The concept of adjective agreement might not exist in every language, but the principle behind it that word choices affect meaning that's universal.
And these creative exercises, those are like a secret weapon for any language learner. They make practicing vocabulary and grammar so much more fun than staring at a textbook.
No matter what language you're learning, finding ways to have fun with it is key. That's what makes it stick.
Okay, before we dive into the next exercise, I'm curious, what stood out to you about the way Jaime Lara structured these exercises?
One thing that really struck me was how he uses the exercises to reinforce that idea of adjective agreement without explicitly calling it out, like it's woven into the very fabric of the practice.
I see what you mean. It's not like he stops to give a grammar lecture every few minutes, but by consistently presenting the correct forms, he's kind of training our brains to recognize those patterns.
Exactly. It's like learning through osmosis. You're picking up the rules simply by being immersed in the language. And before you know it, you're using adjective agreement naturally without even thinking about it.
Yeah, he definitely seems to believe in that practice makes perfect philosophy. I remember him saying that even making mistakes is part of the process.
And that's such an important message for language learners. It's so easy to get discouraged when you stumble. But those stumbles are actually valuable opportunities to learn and grow.
It's like he's saying, don't be afraid to experiment, to play with the language, make it your own.
Right, and I think his approach with these creative, engaging exercises really helps foster that sense of playfulness.
So for our listener who's working on their Spanish adjectives, what are the big takeaways from these exercises?
Well, first and foremost, mastering adjective agreement. It's a fundamental building block of Spanish grammar.
Definitely makes sense. We saw how even a little change in the ending can completely change the meaning.
And secondly, visual aids and creative exercises. They can be super effective tools for learning. They help you internalize vocabulary and grammar rules in a way that feels much more natural and engaging than just rote memorization.
I totally agree. Those image-based exercises were way more fun than just staring at a list of words.
Exactly. And lastly, don't be afraid to have fun with the language. Try out different adjectives, play around with descriptions, and find what feels right to you.
So it's all about finding your own voice in Spanish, just like we were talking about with those mountain descriptions.
Precisely. It's about expressing yourself, not just parroting back what you've been taught.
Now, I know we've been super focused on Spanish, but I'm curious, do you think these ideas could be applied to learning other languages too?
That's a great question. And I absolutely believe they can. While the specific rules of adjective agreement might not apply in every language, the underlying principle using words thoughtfully to convey precise meaning, that's universal.
So no matter what language you're learning, paying attention to those subtle nuances is key.
Absolutely. And when it comes to those creative exercises, those are a game changer for any language. They make practicing vocabulary and grammar feel less like a chore and more like a game.
So listener, if you're tackling a new language, don't underestimate the power of finding ways to make the learning process fun and engaging. It can make all the difference.
Couldn't agree more. Now, speaking of making things fun and engaging, exercises 3 and 4 in Jaime Lara's video, they follow a similar format to exercise 2, but with different sets of images.
Yeah.
This time we're looking at things like a man, a beach, a car, a sofa.
It seems like he's really trying to give learners a wide range of vocabulary to work with.
Exactly. The more you encounter a word in different contexts, the better you'll understand its nuances and the easier it will be to remember.
It's like each new context adds another layer of meaning to the word, making it stick in your mind.
I like that analogy. It's like building a multi-dimensional understanding of the word.
One word that really stuck with me from Jaime Lara's examples was insipida. He used it to describe food that was tasteless.
Ah, yes, insipida. Not exactly a flattering adjective, but it definitely gets the point across.
It's so much more evocative than just saying like not good or bland.
And it highlights another interesting aspect of learning adjectives, their emotional connotations. Some adjectives are purely descriptive, while others carry a positive or negative charge.
Right, like delicious has a very different feeling from disgusting, even though both are describing taste.
Exactly. And being able to use those emotionally charged adjectives effectively, that's a sign of true fluency.
So it's about going beyond the dictionary definition of a word and understanding how it's actually used in real-life situations.
Precisely. And that's something that can only come through practice and exposure to authentic language.
And that's where those creative exercises really shine. They give you a safe space to experiment with different adjectives and see how they work in different contexts.
Speaking of experimentation, I'm curious to hear from our listener again. What were some of the most evocative or amusing adjectives you encountered in Shami Lara's examples?
Maybe there was a word that made you laugh, or one that perfectly captured the essence of an image.
Share your thoughts with us. We'd love to hear what resonated with you.
Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into Shami Lara's adjective exercises, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question. How could you adapt these exercises to practice other aspects of Spanish grammar, or even apply them to learning a completely different language?
That's a fantastic question. It really encourages us to think beyond this specific deep dive and see the bigger picture.
Exactly. Like, imagine taking that image-based exercise, and instead of describing the images with adjectives, you have to come up with sentences using different verb tenses.
That's a brilliant idea. Or you could use the images to practice using prepositions, or maybe even to create short stories.
The possibilities are endless. And what's really cool is that you could apply this to learning a language that has a completely different grammatical structure from Spanish.
Absolutely. If you were learning Japanese, for example, you could use the images to practice using particles. Or if you were learning Mandarin, you could use them to practice constructing sentences with different measure words.
It's amazing how these simple exercises can be adapted and applied in so many ways. It really highlights the power of creative learning and the importance of being an active learner.
Well said. It's all about taking the information you're given and finding ways to make it your own.
So, listener, as you continue your language learning journey, remember the lessons we've uncovered today. Don't be afraid to experiment, get creative, and most importantly, have fun.
And never underestimate the power of a well-placed adjective. It can truly make all the difference in painting a vivid picture with your words.
Beautifully said. Until next time, keep those linguistic muscles flexed. And remember, the world is full of fascinating things to describe, so go out there and find your voice.
Hasta luego. Yeah, it really gets those creative juices flowing.
Absolutely. It's like, taking those basic building blocks and figuring out all the cool things you can create with them. It reminds me of like those Lego sets I had as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you start with the same basic bricks, but there are just endless possibilities.
I love that analogy. It really speaks to the importance of being an active learner, not just passively absorbing information, but really engaging with it and making it your own.
For sure. It's about taking ownership of that learning journey and having fun along the way.
Yeah. And when it comes to language learning, I think that sense of ownership and enjoyment is absolutely crucial. Because let's be honest, learning a new language, it could be tough. There are going to be times when you get frustrated, times when you feel stuck. But if you can approach it with that sense of curiosity and playfulness, those challenges become much easier to overcome.
Couldn't agree more. So, listener, as you continue on your language learning journey, remember those lessons we've learned from Shami Lara's adjective exercises. Don't be afraid to experiment, to play with the language, and to find what works best for you.
And never underestimate the power of a well-placed adjective. It can really make all the difference in painting that vivid picture with your words.
Well said. Until next time, keep those linguistic muscles flexed, and remember, the world is full of fascinating things to describe, so go out there and find your voice.
Hasta luego.